Hello to you. I do hope you're well. Welcome to this AQA A-Level Religious Studies video. I'm Ben Wardle, and today we're taking a look at our A-star essay skills for 10-mark questions and 15-mark questions. So we'll be talking through the AQA mark scheme, and I'll also give you some example A-star phrases that you can include in your 10-mark and your 15-mark answers. Let's start with a look at what I like to call the A-star essentials. So they are the key ingredients that you need to include in your 10-mark questions, and then we'll look at your 15-mark questions in order to help secure an A-star. So remember, our 10 markers will always ask us to examine. And so in order to secure an A-star, we need to make sure we are answering the exact question set. Do not just go off on a tangent about the topic. Make sure everything that you're including is relevant and is fully focused on answering that question. You need to make sure that you use scholars and that you're including them in, ideally, every paragraph that you're writing. You then, of course, need to include clear explanations of their ideas, because when we are examining, we are explaining and we're demonstrating our understanding. So you need to make sure that you are explaining what scholars believe and that you are developing those explanations. So make sure for an A-star that you are going into detail. And you can do that by using examples to illustrate, and also make sure you're including different case studies as well. For example, if you're writing about religious experiences, talk about different people who have had one. For example, St. Paul. And then it's also really important in your 10 markers that you are referring to sources. So, for example, you're referring to a book that one of the scholars has written, and that you are referring to scripture as well. And of course, that is particularly important in your paper 2 10 markers when you are explaining about religious beliefs. So you absolutely need to be including Bible quotes in your answers. In terms of our A-star essentials for a 15 marker, then, again, it's really important that you are answering the exact question. Do not go off on a tangent. Make sure that everything you write is fully relevant and fully focused. It's also really important in your 15 markers that you get off the fence and that you actually attack the question. I want you to imagine yourself as a courtroom lawyer, and it is your job to persuade the examiner of the conclusion you are going to reach. So make sure that you have got a brilliant critical tone throughout your essay. And then the other top tip here is that you keep referring back to the question. Make sure that at the end of every paragraph you write, you are then linking back to the statement you are evaluating, because that will then help to ensure you are answering the exact question throughout. What else do we need to include then? Well, I would always start a 15 marker with a strong and clear introduction that sets out the thesis statement. So that is going to summarize in one sentence what your essay will be concluding. You then again need to include scholars in every paragraph, and you're going to be using them to support the arguments that you're making. You need to again include examples, and you could again be using different case studies to illustrate and to demonstrate the arguments you're making. You need to again refer to sources. So, for example, books that the philosophers have written. And again, especially on paper 2, you need to make sure you're referring to scripture. For your 15 markers, you also need to be comparing ideas, because, of course, you are evaluating a statement. So you're going to be bringing in different scholars who have got different things to say. In order to secure that A-star, you need to make sure you've included critical analysis. So don't just state what different scholars have said, but actually make judgments. You need to then say whether they are right in the conclusions that they're reaching and the statements that they have made. So then add in a line such as, this is a strong argument, or this is fatally flawed because. So as I said before, you've got to attack the question. You've got to have a critical tone throughout. And that's why critical analysis is so important. You need to be making judgments about what the scholars have said. And that brings me to the next point. You need to make sure you're making evaluative judgments throughout your essay. And then, of course, at the end, that you are concluding with a strong and clear conclusion that sets out a well-justified judgment, because evaluating the statement requires a judgment. You need to end your essay with that really clear judgment as to whether you agree or disagree with that statement. So that is a little overview of the A-star essentials for each question. Now let's have a little look more in depth and let's actually talk through the AQA mark schemes and look at some example phrases you can use for each type of question. So let's start with our AO1 10 markers. And remember, these questions will always ask us to examine, and that means that we've got to explain in detail. So with your 10 markers, you are being assessed on AO1, which is all about knowledge and understanding. And in order to get an A star, you need to have level 5 AO1, which means you are getting 9 or 10 out of 10. So what do AQA say we need to do in order to secure a level 5? Well, the knowledge and critical understanding we show needs to be accurate, relevant, and fully developed. So really important words there. It's got to be accurate, which is why you've got to be focused on that exact question. It's got to be relevant. So again, you can't go off on a tangent. Everything that you've written, needs to be focused on that question. And your answer needs to be fully developed in breadth and depth. So you need to be going into detail and you need to be developing your explanations. For example, by using examples, by using evidence, and by using those case studies. And that brings me to the next line here. There needs to be very good use of detailed and relevant evidence, which may include textual or scriptural references where appropriate. So it needs to be fully focused and it needs to be fully supported with examples and with evidence. Let's look at that next bullet point then. It says where appropriate, good knowledge and understanding of the diversity of views and or scholarly opinion is demonstrated. And all that means is that you are writing about different scholars. Now remember, you are not evaluating, so you are not in a 10 marker expected to make judgments, but you do need to be stating different viewpoints. So of course, that's why you need to be writing about 2 or 3 paragraphs. I would be aiming to write 3 different paragraphs with a different scholar or a different case study in each paragraph, because that then shows the diversity of views, doesn't it? And then the third bullet point is that there is clear and coherent presentation of ideas with precise use of the appropriate subject vocabulary. So you need to plan your answer before you start writing it so that you know exactly what you're going to be including in each paragraph before you then start writing the first one, so that your answer then flows and that the examiner thinks that it's a really clear, well thought out and well put together response. And that final line is again really important. You need to be using your subject vocabulary. So make sure you can spell the words correctly and make sure that you are using them throughout your essay. So as I say, to get an A star, we need to be into level 5, which is where you're getting 9 or 10 out of 10. And when the examiner gives you a level 5, that's because they think your response is very good. And that is because it has met those 3 bullet points that we've just talked through. And if we look at the lower levels, we can then see what makes an A-star student stand out. Because in order to get level 4, your answer needs to be good. In order to get level 3, so in order to get about half marks, it needs to be a general response. For a level 2, which of course we're not going to be getting, they have to think that it's a limited response. And then for level 1, if someone was to get 1 or 2 marks, that's because the examiner thinks that it is basic. So we can see very clearly what it takes to get an A star and to get 9 or 10 out of 10. And it is that our answer is very good. That's because it is accurate, it's relevant, it's fully developed, and that we're including different scholars and we've got those clear explanations of what they said. So if we just break that down into 5 requirements, I would say that in order to get that level 5, you need to show an excellent ability to address the question. So as I say, everything you write has got to be relevant. It's got to be focused. You've got to show excellent understanding and engagement with the material. And you show that understanding by developing your explanations and referring to evidence. There needs to be excellent selection and deployment of the material. So again, you're going to be referring to evidence, you're going to be using examples, you're going to include case studies, you're going to be naming books that scholars have written, and you're going to be referring to verses from the Bible. You need to show that excellent range of scholarly views and academic resources. So again, you're referring to scripture. If you're talking about Christianity, you're referring to a text that a philosopher has written. And then finally, bringing that all together, your examiner needs to feel you've got an excellent understanding of what the question is asking, and you've got an excellent understanding of that topic. And so if they feel you've met those 5 bullet points, I would say you're on track to get your A star for your 10 markers. Now, to help you along the way, I've got a few AO1 phrases that you can include in your essay. So obviously, our key explain phrase is "this is because," and that phrase guarantees that we're then going into detail and developing our explanations. But as you can see, there are many different phrases that you can and should be including in your AO1 answers to secure a level 5. So as I say, because is always the go-to word for explanations, isn't it? So make sure you're including that throughout your essay. But you can also use different phrases to produce reasons, such as "for this reason," "this is supported by," "this argument is based on," "this establishes that," and "the foundation for this argument is." In order to then develop those explanations, we need to probe deeper. So you could write "this assumes that," "underlying this view," "this worldview suggests," "this implies," "this is grounded in a Christian worldview," for example, which suggests that. From a Christian perspective, perhaps this is why, or indeed, there is a widespread view that. And then again, in terms of developing our explanations, we need to then extend them. And we can do that by using phrases such as "furthermore," "as a result," "indeed," "this is consistent with the philosophical ideas of," and then bring in a new scholar. "Consequently," "subsequently," "it follows that." Another philosophy which is commonly cited when referring to such matters is "indeed, this is similar to," and then bring in another philosopher, their argument, which. X's theory applies very usefully here. An equally effective argument is. A good example that demonstrates this is, and then obviously bring in a case study, or Plato takes this worldview and develops it to include, as another example. So hopefully you can see there that all of those AO1 phrases are all about producing reasons, probing deeper, and adding detail. And if you make sure that you go into that detail and you fully explain what the scholars have said, you are on track for securing your AO1 A star. Let's have a look now, shall we, at our AO2. And again, we are aiming for level 5, which means we are getting 13, 14, or 15 out of 15. So what is AO2 all about? Well, it's all about evaluation and analysis. We are being asked to evaluate the statement, but don't forget, you also need to include critical analysis as well. So what do AQA expect from us in order to secure 15 out of 15? Well, we've got to produce a very well-focused response to the issue raised. And again, this reflects the fact that everything you write needs to be fully focused and it needs to be absolutely relevant. We need to produce a perceptive discussion of different views, and perceptive means that it's got originality and they can see you've actually thought about it. You're not just rewriting the textbook, you're actually thinking for yourself, you're making judgments throughout your essay. There needs to obviously be different scholars in there, and you then need to critically analyze what they've said. So again, you can't just state what different scholars have said. You need to be making judgments as to whether they're right in what they've said or they're actually wrong if their argument is flawed. There then, of course, needs to be appropriate evaluation, fully supported by the reasoning. And we need to see that in your conclusion when you make your judgment as to whether you agree or disagree with the statement. And as it says there, it needs to be supported by the reasoning. You can't just say whether you agree or not. You need to justify why. You need to explain how you've come to that conclusion. And then again, as we saw with AO1, we need to have precise use of the appropriate subject vocabulary. So make sure you are using those specialist terms and that you are spelling them correctly. If we look at this on the mark scheme then, as I mentioned, to be securing the top marks, we need to be into level 5, which is where we're getting 13, 14 or 15 out of 15. And the key terms here are that it is a very focused and a perceptive response. You've got to be focused on the question. Remember, I said you need to answer the exact question. You need to actually attack that question, and you then need to always refer back to the question throughout your essay. but it also needs to be perceptive. And that is why your critical analysis is really important, because you are not just rewriting the textbook, you're actually making judgments. And that is how you get into level 5. If we look again at the lower levels, a level 4 would be a well-focused response. Level 3 is a general response. Level 2 is again limited, and level 1 is once again basic. So again, you can see what you need to do in order to get into level 5 and secure your A star. It's got to be a very focused response that is perceptive. And all that means is that you are making those judgments, that you are actually thinking for yourself as a philosophy student, and you're not just rewriting the textbook. So if we break this down again into our 5 key requirements, I would say that your essay needs to have an excellent line of argument. So you're going to start with your thesis statement, you're going to refer back to the question throughout your essay, and you're going to reach a conclusion at the end. There needs to be excellent critical analysis where you're making those judgments about what scholars have said throughout your essay. There needs to be excellent and extensive use of scholars. So you need to be referring to scholars throughout your essay. There needs to be an excellent focus on the question. Again, do not go off on a tangent. Make sure that you're fully focused. And then there needs to be excellent use of those key terms and that specialist vocabulary throughout your answer. So what AO2 phrases can we be including to help secure our A star? Well, we of course need to be using that evaluative language, and we need to be using language that helps critical analysis to come through. So you can use phrases such as, this argument is coherent, this argument is convincing, X's argument succeeds because, X forms the highly compelling argument because, this is an unsatisfactory explanation because, this is a robust defense of, this has been challenged by X who rejected, this authoritatively shows, this argument is fatally flawed because, and that's one of my all-time favorite phrases, and this clearly demonstrates that. We also, of course, want to use language that presents counter arguments, because in your essay, you need to be giving both sides of the argument, don't you? So when you're doing that, you can use phrases such as, this has been challenged by, a more coherent approach is developed by, perhaps the most effective challenge to X is, nevertheless, this position has been criticised on the grounds that, although X has a significant place in something, it lacks Y. However, this argument can be rebutted by, this position is significantly undermined by. On the other hand, X would assert that, in contrast to this, etc. Yeah, and what you can see there is you need to always be challenging the viewpoint that you've just explained and presented. So make sure in your essay you have got those contrasting views throughout it before reaching that conclusion at the end of it. And talking of concluding, here are some phrases to help you do that. You could write, in conclusion, it is clear that, overall, this side of the argument seems more convincing because, it has been clearly established that, the preceding analysis suggests, and finally, based on the finding that. So as you can see, when you're concluding, don't just reach a judgment. Don't just say, I agree with the statement. Make sure that the tone you're taking is academic and that you are fully justifying the conclusion you have reached. And in terms of your AO2 answers, my top tip here actually is that you always start with your thesis and then you take your examiner on a journey to your conclusion, because the philosophy essay always has a main thesis. That is your one sentence summary, which sums up what you're trying to establish as your conclusion at the end. So your thesis is at the core of your 15 marker, because you're going to include it in your introduction, you're going to refer back to it throughout your essay, and then you're going to fully justify it in your conclusion. So a top tip for your revision is that for every past paper question you see, think, what would my thesis statement be? Would my essay be concluding that the statement is right or that the statement is wrong? And what is the reason for that? So get into the habit, when you see your past paper questions, of coming up with a thesis statement. And then you're going to take your reader, you're going to take the examiner on a journey from your thesis statement at the start throughout your essay, which, remember, every paragraph will be linked back to the question, and then you'll arrive at that conclusion. And if you can do all of those things we've talked about today, I think you are on the journey, you are on track for achieving an A star in A-level religious studies. So thank you for watching. I do hope that's been helpful, and good luck with all your revision.